Started. My name's Andy Gustafson. I know quite a few of you because you're in my AI social media and meaning of life class, and we're grateful to have the rest of you come. Thank you for coming today. We have Joe Vukov with us today. He's a professor, associate professor of philosophy at Loyola University. He does a lot of interesting things with teaching classes on neuroscience and ethics, and also working with biologists on a class that kind of is at the intersection of how do some of the AI things connect with human psychology. So he's got a lot of interesting background, and I know Joe from way back. He was at the school that I taught at 20 years ago. And so we've been in touch and been connected that way for many, many years. It's been fun to be with you the last 24 hours. He also is a fellow at the Hank Center?
Associate Director.
Associate Director at the Hank Center, which is the Hank Center for Catholic Intellectual Heritage at Loyola University. So they do things. The last issue they did of their annual was on AI. He's recently come out, he's written a couple of books. This is the most recent one, Staying Human in an Era of Artificial Intelligence. We've read some of this for our class. It's a great book. It really is a good intro. Today, he's going to talk to us, not necessarily about the book, but about some topics that are related to that. So thank you very much, Joe, for being here today.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you all for coming out today, especially when it's a early morning and a beautiful day. You know, that can be hard to get out of bed and get something. So I appreciate you all being here. I want to start out today in a little unorthodox way. I want you to close your eyes. The first thing I want you to imagine is I want you to imagine one of your most human moments. It's a little vague, but it's intentionally so. I want you to picture where you're at, what you're doing, who you're with. Bring in some sights, bring in some sounds, kind of imagine it as robustly as you can. Okay, keep your eyes closed. Now I want you to picture yourself throughout a typical day. Don't have to review the whole day, but I want you to picture, what are you doing? Who are you with? How are you spending your time? Maybe picture yourself in the evening in your dorm room or back at home. What are you doing? All right, you can open your eyes. Somebody want to share what they imagined when I asked you to imagine one of your most human moments? What came to mind? Yeah, it's that, right?
Yeah. It was just like, I was just thinking more of social gatherings,
Good.
like 4th of July parties, or everyone like packing into a movie theater that's like a really hyped up movie, or like concerts.
Okay, good. Yeah, so you're at a big concert, live concert, right, with lots of friends, and music's loud, and you're in the mosh pit or whatever. The mosh pits were a thing when I was a teenager. I don't know if they're still a thing. Right, yeah, so or 4th of July. I love 4th of July picnics growing up too. We had these giant water balloon fights and watermelon and all that. Right, yeah, so you got your family, your friends, you're doing 4th of July picnic. Those are both great. Anyone else want to share something? Most human moments. There's no right answer here, by the way. Yeah, what was your name?
I'm Eric.
Yeah, Eric.
I'd say my most human moment is like just like going out with friends and playing in the ocean and playing. I feel like water is like
Okay, nice. You from one of the coasts?
No, just the specific one I thought of was last spring break. My buddies and I went down to Puerto Rico, and we just found this like beautiful waterfall spot, and we didn't bring our phones or anything. It was just like awesome to just swim in and hang around.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so you're with friends, you're out in nature, swimming under the waterfall. Reminds me, once it's totally a tangent, but I was once, I worked in Kenya for a little while, and I was with this friend of mine, we found this waterfall in the middle of the Serengeti. Like those don't exist, right? It's just like totally flat land. But we found this waterfall, and we went camping there. And that was probably if I was to imagine this, it would be one of my most human moments too. It's very similar, sort of swimming around in this waterfall with a friend of mine, sort of totally disengaged from technology and just there with a buddy in nature. Maybe one more volunteer. What did you imagine when you imagined the most human moment? Or a most human moment?
I imagine when Amos was born, my son.
Yeah, great.
Being in the hospital room.
That's pretty human.
Hearing these cries for the first time.
Yeah. No, being there for a birth of a child. I have 3 kids, and it's a very human moment. What about when you imagined your typical day? What did that look like? Any volunteers? I take it it's going to be a little bit more boring. Yeah, Eric?
It's definitely a lot more boring than my most human moment, but I see myself just kind of waking up, going to class, and then hanging out with my roommates all day and doing some homework and then wasting a lot of time on my phone.
Good. I was going to say, I mean, if you're like me, and I take it you are, my typical day looks a lot like this, right? On our phones a lot. If I imagine myself at home at night, it's usually like I'm watching some Netflix or something. During the day, I have some in-person meetings, but a lot of my day-to-day life is logging into Zoom, like staring at little square tiles. So that looks like a big chunk of my day is hanging out in these digital spaces. And I know I'm not alone there, right? That's, we're obviously not in digital spaces all the time, but a lot of our day-to-day life is spent in digital spaces, on our phones, in Zoom meetings, on Instagram, that sort of thing. I take it that almost all of us would agree that human moment we imagined is somehow more real and more important than the day-to-day life that you imagine in the second scenario. That's what we would say is that's the sort of life that I really want to be living. The reason that I had you imagine these two kind of scenarios is that I want to propose to you that increasingly in the 21st century, we're living in 2 different worlds. And the 2 worlds are what we could call the human world and the post-human world. The human world is the one that you imagined in the first scenario, and the post-human world is increasingly what our lives look like in our day-to-day lives. So I just want to do a little compare and contrast exercise to kind of flesh out what the human and post-human worlds look like. The human world, and both of our volunteers, actually all of our volunteers, right? So it's Matt, Eric, Andy, all gave us descriptions of things that were very much, we could call them analog and embodied, right? It's you're out in nature with friends, you're at a concert, or you're at a 4th of July picnic, you're there for the birth of your child. That's about as like, and these were, I didn't pay them to give me these, right? But it's about the most perfect examples I could have asked for. It's like as present, as embodied, as non-digital as you could possibly get. And Eric even said like, no, it's like precisely when I'm disengaged from tech, I'm just with my friends in nature. And contrast that with this post-human world that we're increasingly living in. One that isn't embodied, but is largely disembodied. Right? Think of the experience of sitting in Zoom meetings. It's about as disembodied as you could get, right? You're just sitting in a chair and you're staring at a screen, it's disembodied. Same thing with scrolling on our phones, it's disembodied, right? You're just kind of scrolling on your phone. Same thing with sitting on the couch and watching Netflix. You're kind of divorcing yourself from your body. I'm giving a term here that we can get into later. I think about this as a form of what's sometimes called Gnosticism. Gnosticism is an ancient way of understanding the human person. And roughly what Gnosticism says is that the human body doesn't matter much to who we are. So what I want you to see is that when I ask you to imagine a human moment, almost all of you, and maybe some of you are receptions, everyone who spoke gave examples of places in which they were fully in their bodies and in the world. Whereas in our day-to-day lives, we increasingly act as if that's not a reality. We increasingly act as if we're disembodying things. Second point of contrast. Our most human moments are what, I don't know if I love this term. We're going to roll with it. We could call them leisurely. What I want it to be in contrast with is being optimized. How many of you wear a Fitbit or an Apple Watch? Okay, about half, right? Increasingly more and more, right? As we think about our activity in day-to-day life as being a matter of tracking our steps and things like this, right? It's how many likes did I get on social media? How many steps did I take? How can I look at a metric to decide how well I did today? And that's the way that we navigate our lives. Did you get your 10,000 steps? Especially as I'm solidly middle-aged at this point in my life, and more friends are like, oh, like, our bodies are going to fall apart if we don't get our 10,000 steps today. Did I get it? No, I got to go and like, jostle around my kitchen for a while to get those steps. And compare that to what would have been a more human activity, which is like taking a hike with a friend. Right? Like, was it a good morning? I have no idea how many steps I took. But I know it was a really great hike that I took with Ryan. I actually have a friend named Ryan. We go on a hike every Wednesday morning, and we purposely do not track our steps. But notice how we're sort of slipping from things like leisure activities, like taking walks with friends, into talking about, no, like it wasn't a successful day because I got to take a hike with Ryan. It was a successful day because I got 12,000 steps. Wasn't that awesome? Another contrast. In our post-human world, we more and more have our experiences tailored to us and personalized for us. Think about how most of us go about finding our next video we're going to watch on YouTube or our next book. I don't know if you're like me, but when I go to YouTube, I just look at the recommendations, and usually there's something I kind of like, and then I watch that thing. Same thing with Amazon, right? I've shopped on Amazon enough. I bought enough books on Amazon. I can just look on Amazon, and the algorithm's got me pegged. Right? I look and it's like, yep, those are the books, in fact, I want to buy. And that's what I buy. And that's how a lot of our shopping habits are shaped, right? Is by social media and by big data telling us the next thing we want to view, the next thing we want to buy. Contrast that with a life lived in analog, a more human world, in which I don't find my next book by what Amazon recommends to me. Instead, I go to my friend Andy and say, hey, Andy, what book should I read next? And he gives me a set of recommendations. Then I read that. What I really want you to notice here is how different those forms of engagement are. This form of engagement is share. It's me and a friend talking about books that we might want to read, and then me selecting a book based on that. The other one is very personalized, which might sound good, but notice how in personalizing my book selections or my movie selections, what I've actually done is insulated myself from everyone around me. I no longer have to ask my friends what book I want to read next. I can just look at the algorithm and it will tell me what book I should read next. And finally, there's this difference in what can be monetized. I know that especially those of you taking Andy's class this semester, but this should not be a hot take for anybody, is our online digital lives are all monetized, right? The attention economy. What videos you're looking at, how long you're looking at those videos, what books you're clicking on, all of that is data that's collected, and a lot of it ends up being stolen. Whereas our analog lives, right, Eric's time in the waterfall with your friends, it would be really, really hard to monetize that. So what I want you to see here is this fact that increasingly, we really are kind of living in these two worlds. One in which is the kind of human world that humans have lived in for 200,000 years since we've been around as a species. And the other world is this post-human world that looks in ways significantly different from the human world that humans have been living in really until the last 20 years. So the current state of things is I want to make sure, I'm going to say some pretty critical things about the post-human world in these opening comments, and I'm only going to talk for about 20 minutes. I really do want to make sure that most of this is a discussion. I want to be clear that even though I'm going to say some critical things about the post-human world, I'm not against playing Madden with your friends or taking Zoom meetings or tracking your steps or anything like that. I don't think those are bad things. And I think what's good too now is the responses that all of you gave. So when I asked you to imagine your most human moments, none of you said, it's when I'm all alone in my room watching my favorite Netflix shows. That might be, in fact, how most of us spend our time. When I asked you to imagine your most human moments, and I take it probably none of you imagine, that's what, my most human moment is doom scrolling on Instagram. That is when I feel most fully alive. Even though a lot of us do that, right? That we still sort of know, no, that's not when I'm most human. When I'm most human is when I'm with friends, when I'm eating food, when I'm out in nature, when I'm on a hike. That's what it looks like to be human. So we live in these two worlds, increasingly so. But I'm optimistic that we still sort of know that the human world is the more human world, is the more real world. But here's my worry, is that the more we live in a post-human world, the more that we think in terms of optimization and monetization and efficiency and digitization and disembodiment, and this is just more and more what we're doing, is that we start to lose sight of those human moments. Because I don't know if your life is like mine, but those human moments are increasingly far between. My day-to-day life, all through the week, is on Zoom meetings, on social media, and on Netflix. And more, it's sort of like, no, like when am I actually living human moments? Well, not very often anymore. And increasingly, we're not living those human moments anymore. So my worry is that as we keep living in this post-human world, number one, we lose sight of who we are. We lose sight of what it is that makes us a human being, right? That as a human being, we're not just things that are meant to be optimized and digitized and disembodied, but that we're something more than that. We can talk more about, this is a character. He's not a character, he's a real person. He's also kind of a character in the sense that he's a little eccentric. Blake Lemoine, he's in the book, for those of you in the class, so you might have come across his name. He was an engineer at Google, was an engineer at Google because he got canned. The reason he got canned is that he was working on this algorithm, an AI algorithm, and went public with this whistleblower claim that he thought the algorithm had become conscious or sentient. Right? So he's like, ethics violation, we're making this algorithm and it's conscious, we gotta like do something different because like we can't keep working on this thing. And they're like, yeah, it's not sentient and we're gonna can you. Right, so that's what happened to Blake Lemoine. I do worry though, so I think Blake's wrong, but I worry that Blake's perspective becomes more and more attractive as we lose sight of who we are. We start thinking, no, actually like humans aren't much more than an algorithm. Humans aren't much more than something that can be optimized and digitized. So that Blake's perspective is really, while a wrong perspective, is the natural progression of the way that we're living our lives. He's observing our lives and saying, yeah, the post-human life largely is something that can be replicated by an AI. So here we built this thing that looks a lot like the post-human life. Maybe it's a human. What has Blake done though? He's lost sight of who we are. And I worry that we will quickly follow suit too if we don't take some serious time to think about who we are and who we're becoming. The second thing I worry about is that as we increasingly live in a post-human world, we lose our capacity to act as humans. We'll talk about this a little bit more too. But think about the amount of, so it's a fancy word that philosophers use, so I apologize for that. But think about the amount of agency, the amount of autonomy, the amount of choice you have in your whole life, and how much that gets constricted the more you live in a digitized, optimized world. How many of you, by show of hands, have used a physical map to get to a friend's house? Or have like called up a friend and been like, hey, Eric, how do you get to your place? And Eric gives you some directions like, oh, you go to the gas station, then you take a right, then you look for like the smoke shop, and then you take a left, and it's like 5 houses in. How many of you have navigated to a friend's house like that?
More of a proxy for age.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's a little bit. So I'm glad to see a few of the younger people raise their hand too. But it's definitely becoming a lost art very quickly, right? So what's the one thing we're losing there? Well, we're losing inconvenience. So that's kind of a good thing, right? We don't get lost on our way to a friend's house, but we're also losing this ability to like drive our car to our friend's house, right? We're just listening to the algorithm tell us how to get to the friend's house. Or again, think about the more I rely on the Amazon algorithm to tell me what to buy next, the more that I lose my own agency in selecting my next book. I've sort of ceded control to what Jeff Bezos tells me I should buy next. It's kind of a scary thought. Okay, this talk is not just about digital culture, but is about AI specifically. So what I want to do really quickly is walk you through one reason why I think we need to pay careful attention to what's going on in the world of artificial intelligence. And one of the main motivations, this is not anything from the book, but it's one of the main motivations behind this book, kind of underneath the surface. So for those of you that read this won't be repeat material. It'll just be kind of some like background, if here's some of what's going on in the background. Because I think one problem with AI is that it has the capacity to accelerate this post-human world that we're already primed to live in. So I want to walk you through why I think that. First of all, AI has the capacity to accelerate this trend of optimization. right? Wearing Fitbits, wearing Apple Watches. I don't know if any of you know the Whoop strap. Anyone know this? Yeah, so I see a few heads nodding. So the Whoop strap is sort of like a Fitbit, but it's a lot more accurate and integrates a lot more AI and sort of advanced tech into it. So you wear a Whoop strap and it tracks everything like a Fitbit would, but it's also able to give you things like, here's a sleep score. Here's exactly how well you slept last night. Here's exactly whether you've recovered from that workout yesterday enough to hit the gym today, or whether maybe you should take a day off and recover. So it gives you all this information, and it's something that a lot of professional athletes use. It's really cool information in a lot of ways, but what it's doing is you're increasing this trend towards optimization so that you wear a Whoop strap. And I should say, like, I've been really tempted to get one. I'm like, oh, it's really cool, right? But you lose this capacity to say, I'm feeling kind of tired today. Maybe I shouldn't lift. And instead you check your Whoop strap and you're like, oh, it tells me I'm pretty tired today. Maybe I shouldn't lift, right? So this increased optimization where it's saying, you got to get to bed, Joe, right? And you're like, couldn't I just see if I was tired to tell myself to get to bed? Or shouldn't I know that I need more than the 5.5 hours of sleep that I all too often get, right? But there's this tendency towards optimization that was already there with things like counting your steps and tracking steps, that with AI integration, it's just increasing to the point that it's not just tracking your steps. You're having your Fitbit tell you, get to bed, hit the gym, don't hit the gym, take a break, maybe you should go hit the sauna. And more we're seeking these optimized lives that AI is accelerating us towards. We already talked a little bit about using Siri to get to your friend's house. I'm going to be making some predictions in this talk. We're just kind of giving you a glimpse into the future. Not that I know that this, hey, Chris, not that I know all this stuff is going to happen, but sort of giving you a glimpse and sort of thinking about the ways that we might be heading into the future. Can think about how companies like Tesla are working on automation of cars. If you guys want to come in and sit up here, you can. Come on in, everybody.
Yeah, come on in. Hey, go on in.
I gotta get some work done on that.
Oh, okay.
So you can think about how with the increase of automation in self-driving cars, you pair that up with the Waze app or with Google Maps, and then all of a sudden, you haven't just optimized your ability to get to your friend's house without having to worry about looking up directions. You actually take yourself out of the driving process as well. Right? So as AI becomes more and more integrated into vehicles, and you integrate the vehicles with things like Google Maps, my prediction would be is that pretty soon you're just going to sort of say, here's where I want to go, and you're totally optimized. You avoid traffic, you avoid all the stop signs that gets bogged down, and you are taken out of the equation completely. Increase of optimization, a huge decrease in humanity and agency. AI isn't only going to accelerate this trend of optimization that we see in a post-human world, it's also going to accelerate the process of digitization and the process of moving from analog to digital spaces in ways that I think we would have thought that there's no way you could digitize that. So I want to just give you a couple of examples. This is a picture of a place called VR Church. It's a real thing. This is not made up. You can look it up. VR Church is exactly what it sounds like. Saying, go to church physically? So 20th century, right? We can use tech to get around that. You can sit in the comfort of that office chair at home, strap on your VR goggles, and head to church. And that's what they do. So these people are all digital avatars at VR Church. They're attending church services in the comfort of their own homes. Again, the sort of thing that AI, coupled with other technology like VR technology, is digitizing an aspect of our culture that you would have thought well, you got to go to church in person at least, right? VR Church says no. I should say that this is to prove that I'm not a tech naysayer. This is me with some students back home. We're using our VR goggles, and we actually we're hanging out in VR space. So this is me back here. It kind of looks like me a little bit. So I'm not against VR stuff, but it is interesting that if you were sort of make a list of what are things that you couldn't digitize, you'd say, well, in-person gatherings, going back to Matt's point, right? Going to concerts, there's VR concerts. And as VR gets better, and as the AI integration gets better that allows for those experiences to happen, I think you're going to see more and more people saying, yeah, let's just opt out of actually going to the concert. Let's opt out. This is totally a thing in academia, by the way. In-person conferences are getting pivoted to virtual spaces where there's more and more professors who are it's such a hassle to have to fly to Chicago and like show up in meet space to like meet all these messy, kind of stinky other academics that have rude manners. Like, let me just like stay at home and use an app or use my VR goggles. It'll be much more sanitary and I don't have to get on an airplane. Let's just do it that way. And AI is really going to accelerate that process, is my prediction, because it allows those kind of spaces to be created and be maintained. Other things, right? Digital assistants. I think one of the ones that's very relevant for this context is this pivot. You might think that educational spaces, right? Those are something that you have to show up and meet space for. We have to be physically present to each other. Less and less that's the case. So this is from Morehouse College just this fall, launched AI teaching assistants, right? So you don't have to get your lesson from a physical person. You can rather receive your education from an AI. So I think that AI is going to make inroads into educational spaces. Again, one of these spaces where you would think, no, that's a place where you really should be in person, where you really should be engaging with other people. No, we can swap out an AI for it. The last one, and this is maybe a little bit out there. Has anyone ever heard of Soylent? See a few people nodding, right? So Soylent is a very tech bro thing. If we were in Silicon Valley, you would all raise your hands. The tech bros are very into this. What it is it's sort of a mixture of optimization culture and trying to eliminate our bodies, I think. Because what Soylent is it's basically a shake that contains all the nutrients you need to live. So there's whole cultures, and you can go look up Reddit. There's Reddit threads about Soylent, and people, because they've started making their own mixtures. But it's sort of a big part of coding culture. There will be these coders that will say, I have not had to eat food in 3 years. I got my perfect mixture of Soylent shake, and I just drink the shake, and I'm able to totally ignore the fact that I've got this kind of nasty human body. I can just be dialed in and code all day long. I think you could actually imagine a future. You can sort of imagine the Whoop strap getting combined with Soylent, and you can imagine looking at your Whoop strap, right, and it tells you, today you need 32 ounces of shake, based on your biometric readings, right? And maybe you even get a little intravenous thing. You don't even have to worry about mixing it up, just shoot that right into your veins, and you can forget about eating completely, right? So again, what's this a trend of? I think it's one of these trends of us leaning more and more into this post-human world, where the things that you would say, what can't you digitize? Well, you can't digitize eating, can you? We've got to eat, we're bodies. Well, not completely, but we can get pretty close. We can kind of forget about most of the fact that we're these human bodies that have to eat things. That's Soylent. I realize maybe I'm taking a little longer than my 15 or 20 minutes. Okay, here's a fun one. So we talked a little bit about personalization, right? So personalization is this trend in our post-human world in which I don't have to go ask Matt or ask Father Chris for a book recommendation, because that's kind of this messy shared experience. I've got to interact with other people. I can just look on Amazon and it will tell me exactly what book I want to read next. So that's already AI at work in our lives and personalizing our experiences. What I think we're going to see in the next 10 years in AI is that ramping up a ton. And here's what I mean by that. I think what you're going to see is a shift from ChatGPT. So we can talk more about it. How many of you know ChatGPT reasonably well? Okay. I sort of assume most people know ChatGPT by now. We can talk more about it if anyone wants sort of a refresher course. What I think you're going to see is ChatGPT, which again, if Father Chris and I both ask questions to ChatGPT, it's going to give us different answers, but they're not tailored to me or to Father Chris, right? It's that, no, I could just give it the same question and it would give me 2 different answers. What I think is that you're going to see a shift from ChatGPT to Joe GPT and Matt GPT, Father Chris GPT, where you're actually feeding into the algorithm your own personal data. Maybe it links up with Facebook, maybe it links up with all of the papers you've written, your own personal preferences. So that when I say, can you give me a recipe for brownies? It knows, oh, Joe really likes caramel and sea salt with brownies, but Matt thinks that's nasty. So I'm going to tailor the responses to that. Right? Or when I say, can you help me with this paper I've got in my ethics class? The paper it gives back is not only different when I ask it that, and when Eric asks it that, but then it actually takes into account our class schedules and what we've done in the past and what books we're reading. So that would be my suspicion, is that that's what we're going to see in the evolution of AI, is that you go from not only generative, but personalized generative AI. Look forward another 10 years or so, could be my suspicion, is that right now, Spotify, and this should not be a hot take for anyone, our Spotifys look different based on personal preferences, but the content is content that's out there and then gets personalized to our own taste, right? So it looks, okay, so I have very eclectic taste. Joe really likes like bad 90s punk music, and he likes some jazz, and he likes outlaw country. So we're gonna like make a very weird mashup of Spotify playlists for Joe. And Father, I'm picking on the same people because I know all you. And Father Chris, I don't know, maybe we have the same musical taste.
Punk rock. Yes.
Okay, so punk rock, yeah. Well, what else gets into your playlist?
Oh no, jazz.
Okay, jazz. Okay,
Classical.
classical. Okay, see, Father Chris is fancier than I am. I keep on wanting to like classical music because I'm an academic. I'm intellectual. I should like this fancy music. Then I'll try it for like a year and I'm like, I just don't like it. I go back to my bad punk rock. So Father Chris though has it factored in, right? He's got the classical. So we all know this is how Spotify works, right? Here would be my prediction of what we're going to see is that it's not just that the content is curated in a personalized way, but that we actually get personalized content, right? So that we get like music that's created in real time, tailored to our own tastes. So my Spotify playlist is not like this selection of content that's out there, but it's that literally the content is being generated in the moment. Because we can already do this, right? Is that we can generate music based on taste. Right now it's like not that great, but as AI gets better and better, that would be my prediction. Is that what you're going to see is be like, no, like I actually want like outlaw country that makes references to bad 90s pop punk songs. And it's like, okay, that's really weird. But like, here you go, Joe. It seems like that's what's going to do it for you. And there you go. Right there, I've got the content that I want to listen to. And my guess would be, obviously this is going to take a lot of development, but we're already seeing a lot of inroads into video generating AI, that you're going to get the same thing here, right? That you don't log into Netflix, but you log into JoeFlix and MattFlix and EricFlix. And that it's not just that it's curating the content, right? So that, because we all know that's how it works already, right? The AI is powerful enough to know like, Joe likes these documentaries and sci-fi shows. So we're going to give him lots of that. That's how it already works. The idea is that the content is itself created in a way that's personalized to you. So what happens, right, is that we've already fragmented our ability to share in culture. So this is something it's a real big difference. I don't know. I'm kind of an old guy now. I like to think like I'm not that old, but it's sort of it happens. One big difference I see, I am still a millennial, between millennials and Gen Z, is that as someone who grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, we have common cultural touch points that like everyone knows, like literally everyone. I can go up to anyone else who's 40 years old and say, Green Day. I can say, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I can say Beastie Boys, Tupac, right? It's like, yeah, we all listen to and consume the exact same media. Maybe to various degrees, right? It's like some of us were more into some of us were more into others. But like we all sort of knew the same stuff. And that's just not true anymore. This isn't like your fault as Gen Zers. It's that everyone uses Spotify and Netflix now, right? So like we're directed to different content so that we don't have these shared experiences. So we've already fragmented this shared humanity that I suggested was sort of the opposite of personalization, where we're sharing content and we're sharing our experiences and sharing our humanity. We've already been personalized. Just think when it goes to this. It's like literally, we have no shared experiences. We all get to consume exactly the content that we want, but the content is totally tailored to us. So I can't even say like, hey, do you like Black Mirror on Netflix? It's like, there's no such thing as Black Mirror. There's just like Joe Mirror and Eric Mirror. It's like we're all watching individual shows. So all of a sudden we've gone totally into our own bubbles and we lose this human connection. So I think AI really has a big capacity for hyper-personalization. I was actually just at a conference with Andy actually last week with this guy who, it's a big backstory. The keynote, like he unified the internet. It was the craziest talk. The talk began with, so back when Barack Obama called me in 2013 and told me to unify the internet, and then he was off and running. But he was talking about what his biggest fears are for AI and sort of things that he gets apprehensive about. And this is what he said. It's the hyper-personalization that AI is capable of. Because of exactly this, right? Because we get so fragmented and so put into our own bubbles. sort of the capacity for unifying and sharing experiences shrinks tremendously. And of course, as you get more bespoke personalization, along with that comes the huge opportunity for more personalized monetization. When I'm watching JoeFlex, all of the characters in JoeFlex, like it's not my preferences, but people can be spending for ads so that they're all wearing the sorts of products that I would want to buy, that they're listening to the tunes that I'm going to buy, that they're drinking the sort of drinks. I like Coors Banquet, right? So in JoeFlex, I have very like Dunkin' Donuts coffee and Coors Banquet beer, right? That's what everyone's drinking. So it's sort of tailored to your tastes and your preferences, and that the capacity for monetization. I mean, you can see like how big the capacity is here, right? Just with big data and the capacity to tailor. Again, think about the difference in monetization here, where right now is companies create all these ads, and then through the data that Facebook mines, you can decide Joe gets this ad, Andy gets that ad, Father Chris gets this ad, right? So it's already miles away from what we were able to do like 10, 15 years ago with big data. But just think, if you can create the ads themselves that are individualized for people, how much more the capacity for monetization is. Like you can like directly be like, no, like I don't need to have ads while you're watching Hulu, because like all the people you're watching like will be wearing all the ads and be like, they're having a little side conversation. So, what'd you do last weekend? I drank a lot of Coke. That's great, right? That's sort of like built into the content. So the capacity for monetization gets really big. So all this is to say is that I think at this moment, we're really at a watershed moment. We're at this moment in which we're still living in the human world. We're still having these experiences. We're going to concerts. We're going out in nature. We're taking hikes with friends. We're going to parties. We're going to 4th of July picnics. We are sharing experiences like this in a real classroom with each other physically present. So we're still living in this human world, but more and more, we're also living in this post-human, digitized, optimized world that looks very different from that world. And AI is not making things any better. It's in fact accelerating our trajectory into this post-human world. This watershed moment is big. It's social, it's political, it's economic, it's governmental, right? I don't know, maybe there's somebody in the room who has Sam Altman's ear or Elon Musk's ear or Mark Zuckerberg's ear. Most of us can't make decisions at that level, or Barack Obama's number, apparently like this guy does. I sure don't have any of those people in my contacts. I can't affect things at that level. But maybe the good news is that it's also a watershed moment at the personal level. Right? So there's sort of the big structures. How is AI going to develop? What's going to be legal? What's going to be implemented? How are we going to figure out new laws surrounding AI? Those are big questions that people are grappling with right now. But the good thing is that it's also a watershed moment for us. I really do think that we have the opportunity to choose to live more human or to live more post-human. I talk about AI a fair amount lately, and a question I get all the time is, are you worried about the Terminator? How many of you have seen the Terminator? Okay, a few. Okay, that is more than I was. I mean, everyone over 40 just raised their hands, but I'm very glad that a few of you. Should they go back and watch this one? It's okay. It was sort of a touch point in like late 80s culture, right? So there's this Arnold, was this cyborg that came into there's time travel and stuff involved, but he was basically an AI that terminated people. I'm the Terminator. So am I worried about the Terminator? Is that what AI is going to happen? Or the other big one is something that's called artificial general intelligence. Is the idea of when we've created an AI, basically what Blake Lemoine thinks we've already done, where we create an AI that is able to be as intelligent as we are. Is that going to take over? I'm not that concerned about the Terminator. I'm not concerned about artificial general intelligence. Instead, what I'm concerned about is the Amazon algorithm. I'm concerned about wearing Fitbits. I'm concerned about more and more using ChatGPT. You look at the prompt I typed in here. Can you write a thank you note to Grandma? She gave me $20 for my birthday. I love her a ton. Could you make that clear? Right? Relying more and more on AI to do the things that we should be doing as humans, and instead outsourcing those and saying, it's more efficient, it's easier, it's more optimized if I let my Whoop strap tell me when to eat, if I let the Amazon algorithm pick out my books, if I let ChatGPT write my letters to grandma. Are any of those like ethical red lines in the sand? No, I don't think so, at least. The grandma one might be. You should write your own letters to grandma. But like wearing a Fitbit or a Whoop strap, like that's not like a horribly ethically wrong thing that you did. But I think as those things accumulate, more and more we start to chip away at our humanity. And we just take a little bit away from ourselves and we optimize it, and we make it more efficient, and we monetize it, and then it's no longer ours. Or again, the directions thing, right? More and more that we just, and I'm as guilty as anyone else, right? I'll realize I've been to this friend's house like 20 times and I can't get there on my own because I've only ever used an app to get there. And that's like horrifying. It's like, okay, I drive there all the time. I have no idea how to get to Jim's house. I've lost part of myself. There's a great poem by T.S. Eliot. Any T.S. Eliot fans out there? Okay, a couple T.S. Eliot fans. Shelby T.S. Eliot fans. He's amazing. One of his early poems called The Hollow Man. Very dark. Read T.S. Eliot when you're in a good place. If you read T.S. Eliot in a bad place, like you're only going to go south from there. Even his optimistic poems are pretty bummer. He's got a nice trajectory that he starts out very dark and then he gets to like kind of a little light with the dark. He's got this early poem called The Hollow Man. And The Hollow Man ends with these lines. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. And that's what I worry about when it comes to staying human in an era of AI. I think that we like to think about the bangs. We like to think about what if Arnold shows up as an AI and just starts like tearing it up and terminating everybody? What if we create artificial general intelligence and there's this like supercomputer in Silicon Valley that decides to like take over the world? I love sci-fi as much as the next guy. I love thinking about that stuff. But I think that sometimes the bangs distract us from the whimpers. I think the real challenge to staying human in an era of AI is these small everyday decisions that we're slowly giving away to a post-human way of living. And in the process of doing so, losing our very humanity. So does this mean that we can't use AI? No. I think that there's ways to use it ethically. There's ways to use it humanely. Honestly, I think that in 21st century life, saying I'm not going to use AI will kind of sound like I'm not going to use the internet. It's like, unless you're ready to go join the Amish, it's probably just not possible, right? It's like, it's banking, it's healthcare, it's school. It's like everything is going to be AI integrated, internet integrated. So it's not that we shouldn't use AI, but I think that we do need to make sure that as we use it, we keep a clear sense of who we are and how we need to act as humans. And sometimes I get a little pessimistic that we're going to be able to do that. Maybe this is just like autobiographical, because I see it in myself. Right? It's really hard to say, I don't know Matt. Matt just invited me over to his place. I'm just going to ask him for directions and get a little lost like I used to do in the 90s. It's like, no, like I'm going to like plug it into my phone. That's a really hard decision to make. Right? If my Whoop strap tells me I shouldn't hit the gym today, it's like, well, I thought I was feeling fine, but who am I to argue with my Whoop strap? Like, I guess I'm not supposed to hit the gym today. I'm kind of tired. So it's going to be really hard. And I won't go into all this. But some reasons why when I'm having my more pessimistic moments, I get pessimistic that we'll be able to resist the tide individually from the allure of a post-human world. There's this thing called persuasive design. We could talk about this more. Has anyone heard of persuasive design? It's basically, it's the idea, so it's a big catch term in Silicon Valley. It's what programmers use to keep you dialed in, basically, right? So I'm of the opinion that modern Silicon Valley represents some of the best of human psychology in the history of humankind, because they figured out what makes us tick and how to keep us on YouTube and Netflix. So an instance here is the infinite scroll, right? So in the earlier days of the internet, you had to click like next page, and now you can just doom scroll. That's an instance of persuasive design. It just keeps your eyes glued. And this is like a term in Silicon Valley. How can we get eyes on our devices more? And they've got the best of the best working on this. Second reason I get pessimistic is just the amount of money that's being dumped into AI right now. OpenAI is currently valued at 150 billion, which is almost double from just what it was valued in February. And just the nature of human psychology. We like ease. We like being able to offload some of the things that are difficult to a machine. So that's why I think that resisting the post-human world, choosing not to totally dive in head first, will be really difficult in some ways. It'll look increasingly countercultural to say, no, I'm going to ask a friend for a book recommendation rather than take Amazon's recommendation. I'm going to go back and watch The Terminator instead of just streaming the thing that's on JoeFlix that's perfectly tailored to my interests, right? That's going to look more and more countercultural. People will be like, it's so weird and old. It's like, why would you do that? It's because I want to be a human being, right? I don't want to offload all this to a machine. And more, it's going to be an intentional choice that we have to make rather than the default option. It's going to look weird to stay human because increasingly our world is going to be post-human. But here's the optimism, is that even though that's going to be difficult, it's not something that we have to say, I'm not in control whatsoever. Mark Zuckerberg, what a jerk. He's ruining all of our, we can still say that. Right? We can complain about Mark Zuckerberg, but we don't necessarily have to say our lives are going to lose their humanity with forces beyond my control. I really do think that this choice to stay human is one that each of us and all of us can make and should make, and that it's made through the everyday little choices that we make in our lives. So in what ways do I sort of recognize where the post-human world is making inroads and then say, I actually don't want that. I don't want to listen to Joe Spotify that has my own interest totally. I want to listen to Nirvana. I don't want to watch JoeFlix. I want to watch Terminator. I don't want to take the Amazon recommendation. I want to get one from Father Chris. I don't want to use the Waze app. I want to get a little bit lost. Those are really countercultural ways of proceeding. But I think as we live in an increasingly digital and post-human world, I think those are really important choices to make. And I think those are the choices that ultimately let us to stay human. So that's what I have for you today. Thank you. No, I think what we're going to do is, that was double the time I told you I would take.
Okay. Oh, we still got plenty of time.
Okay.
So we just want to have open discussion. I have questions to ask Joe, but I would rather let you ask questions because you probably have some from this talk or some of the students.
Those of you that read some of the book, I'm happy to answer questions.
Yeah. So I think I'd rather leave it open to you to ask questions first. I've got plenty of questions to ask.
I'm very open to just comments and stuff too. We're not going to make this an open discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you about the monetization of this post-human world. And so we had to make, in a business class I took in high school, we had to make a product and we decided to make an app. And the first question that the investors asked us was, how are you going to make money? And the only answer that we really could find was by putting ads on the app or offering a premium one that doesn't have ads. And I think it's interesting how, what did you say ChatGPT was valued at?
150 billion.
150 billion, and you will never see a single ad when you go on ChatGPT's interface. So I'm kind of confused. I don't know if they're selling information or how they're valued so high, but
It's actually a really good question. I realize I went with a group of business students, and I don't have much in the business background. Do you know how that value? I'll pose it to Andy.
Oh, there's a lot of things in technology that it's hard to know how it's valued.
Yeah.
I think it's what they expect will happen in the future, right? There's plenty of, we know there's plenty of tech companies that have never made a dime, but they still are valued very highly for what might come down the road. And there's been more concern lately.
Yeah.
There's a great article.
Just in The Economist.
Yeah, I guess I brought up The Economist just came out with, the front article is about how AI might be too expensive to continue pursuing, because there's just huge astronomical costs with some of the questions you might ask AI, and there's also the high electricity costs.
Yeah.
And so now that's kind of freaking out some investors who are hoping we got to get on the gravy train.
Yeah, I mean it's all over the place. So evaluation.
So it keeps going up and down, right?
Yeah.
There's been in the last 6 months some skepticism here and there, some hiccups. So it's not it's just sure thing. People are hoping. It's like with Tesla, right? People were on that bandwagon, and sometimes they thought, no, it's going to completely collapse, and other times it keeps on going forward. But it certainly hasn't done everything that Musk thought it would do, but there's still hope that it will. So
Yeah, one place the valuation does come from. So to build a large language model like ChatGPT costs tremendous amounts of resources. Like it's hugely expensive, hugely energy intensive to operate. So one thing that I think you might not, that sort of was insightful to me is that sometimes you'll see these like other GPTs. So I work in Catholic philosophy, so in those spaces a lot. And there's one called magisterial GPT. So you can like ask it questions about the Catholic Church and it'll give you answers, right? Magisterial GPT did not build their own AI, right? It's not like there was a couple of theologians out here that are like, let's just build an AI that can answer magisterial questions. That costs way, like there's no way you could get that much money to build a niche product like that. So what they're actually doing is they're using ChatGPT. They're just paying money to them in order to use their algorithms and then sort of making them tailored to that specific purpose. So you're still basically using the underlying structure of these big companies. So that's one place where the valuation is coming at, is that you get all these applications that are not like going to ChatGPT and asking it for a thank you note. Is that no, I'm like using AI somewhere else for some like smallish company, and that company is using ChatGPT as their foundation. So that's one place where the valuation is coming from. It's a thing that you're not seeing, but it's like other companies buying space from them. In the same way that, like Amazon's going to sell server space and stuff like that. Yeah, Eric.
So, kind of wondering what your level of concern is about one of the last points you made.
Yeah.
We'll have to be really countercultural increasingly if we want to resist AI, resist the control AI might impose in our lives. I'm just wondering if you're concerned with that countercultural kind of idea could turn into like outlaw, because you referenced outlaw country, right? And so, I guess one concern I would have would be that as we get this increased personalization and increased data on everybody, we'll just start having more laws regulating what you have to do. And so it's not necessarily countercultural, it becomes outlaw. And the one like non-techie comparison I would make is that you have to go back some decades, but you didn't always have to give your social security number to get a job.
Yeah.
Right? And then it first started and folks were like, be careful, right? This is going to become standard. And folks were like, no, that's not necessarily true. And of course now if you want to work in the normal economy, nobody even questions it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Good. No, it's a great question. I'll give you two examples where you can see this happening. One is fast forward 20 years and we've got automated vehicles that are integrated with Waze, right? And we pass so already self-driving cars are safer than manual driving cars. There's still glitches, but computers don't fall asleep at the wheel. They don't get distracted by toddlers screaming in the back seat. They just drive. So already the tech is there. Give it 20 more years and integration with maps and integration with Tesla and all this stuff. And it's just they're gonna be safer. So you can very easily imagine passing legislation that says, Andy, you can't drive your F-150 anymore, right? It's too dangerous, right? Like safety necessitates that you get a car that has AI integration because that's going to be safer for the general population. And you might think, yeah, sort of at that point, when I drive my F-150 around, I'm an outlaw. Or maybe the more countercultural thing is, no, I just have to live really close to work. I'm not suggesting you have to do this, and I'm not even suggesting that would be ethically wrong. But yeah, it becomes more and more difficult to say, yeah, I'm going to resist that because driving my old car that doesn't have AI integration is now illegal for the sake of public safety. Another example, you can imagine where big insurance companies start requiring you to wear your Whoop straps or your Fitbits and then obeying them, right? So, and then maybe there's a demerit. So I don't know if all insurance, if Cranes works like this. At Loyola, if you smoke, you get a demerit. So it's not totally coercion, but every year when you're signing up for insurance, you say, am I a tobacco user or not? And if I am, then $50 more a month for your insurance. So you could imagine something like this with a Fitbit, right? Where it says, I'm signing up for insurance 20 years from now, and it says, do you wear your Fitbit? And do you make sure to exercise when it tells you to, and to eat the amount of calories that it tells you to in a given day? Because we know, right? If you follow those commands, you're going to be optimized. You're going to be less of a burden on health insurance. So you have that argument. And you don't wear your Whoop strap? You eat more calories in a day than what it tells you? You don't sleep enough? Oh, maybe it won't be illegal, but $100 more a month, right? You're going to charge you more for health insurance because we know you're going to be more of a burden on the system. So yeah, I do think there are these structural things that I could see happening as AI becomes more and more integrated, where it becomes more and more difficult to resist and say, no, I'm not going to. I actually have a friend, it's my friend Ryan, who I hike with, and he's very inspirational to me. And Ryan is really trying to quit email, which is like next level of this. And he's
What do you
like,
do for a living?
he's a philosopher.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's a professor. He's got tenure, but he's like, you know what? If I do this, I will miss out on all kinds of career opportunities. I will never get promoted again, and there's sort of all these things. But he's like, it might be value. He thinks it's valuable to him, right? He's like, I just don't want to be tied to my email, and I'm going to give the sacrifices. I think that's a little extreme. But I do wonder whether 20 years from now, these choices not to integrate AI into all these areas of our lives look more and more like Ryan. But it's like, no, like this is like not just me having my own personal preference, but there are like tangible losses, financial losses, opportunity losses, job losses that I'm taking because I'm refusing this digital part of that. But it's a loss in one way, but it's a gain in another. Because I think Ryan would say, I'm more human because of it, right? I think that's what we would say too. Like, yeah, I lost my career, or I lost my opportunity for promotion, but I'm more human because of it. So you're hitting that.
Yeah, in chapter 4 of your book, you go over human consciousness
Yeah.
and how we're more than just inputs and outputs, so we can be different than a computer. And then going along with like you being in the science world and stuff, like science has given us a lot of discoveries with ourselves about the world. But do you think there are ideas in science we use that undermine our human nature and take us further away from defining consciousness?
Good, yeah. So give everyone else a little background for what you're talking about, man. Thanks for the question. The leading theory of consciousness right now, or psychological life, and the reason that it makes an appearance in the book, is what's called a computational theory of mind. So it's that roughly what the human mind is kind of like a computer, right? And what that means is that an AI could hypothetically be conscious, because an AI is a computer. So as long as you get it to match the computational ability of what we can do, right? Every scientist is going to agree, and philosopher, like we're a really good computer, right? Really sophisticated. Like, so it's not like we're, a TI-83 calculator. Like, there's a lot going on upstairs. And AI probably can't do all that stuff yet. But if it could, well then sure. Like that's really what a human being is a computing machine. And this is not a niche theory. It's called computational theory of mind, or functionalism. It's actually the leading theory of mind today in philosophy and philosophy of psychology. So it's not the only theory, but it is the leading theory. My take is that what we do there, and have this very scientific view of the human person, is that it's a very reductive view of the human person. As in, we've taken one aspect of our lives. So I think all of us would agree, can we perform functions like a computer can? Well, yeah, we can perform computational tasks. That's one thing we can do. But can human psychological life be reduced to that? Is that all it is at the end of the day? I would argue no. Here's just one quick thing. So you could say like big things like love and hate and angst, right? Those can't be reduced to a computer. I think the more obvious one is all the bodily stuff that we do, right? So a big part of our psychological life is, I used to play guitar, right? Playing guitar, that's a pretty sophisticated cognitive task, but it's not like you're computationally playing guitar. You're playing it with your hands. If you're an athlete, it's a pretty sophisticated cognitive task. Like, you're thinking through, should I go in for the layup? Should I pass? You're thinking a lot, but it's not like you're like computing it. You're thinking with your body in space. So I would say that this reductive theory of mind misses a big chunk of actually what human psychological life consists in. And the way this all ties in is that, because your question, Matt, was something about sort of this scientific view of human consciousness. I'm not one to deny the scientific view of human consciousness at all. I'm a big fan of science. But I think that what we can be led to sometimes is this overly simplistic view of what the human is, that's reductive. And ultimately that view of the human is much more easy to say, well, if that's all the human is, of course we want to optimize it. But if you're a computer, you want to be an optimized computer. So the post-human world actually looks pretty great if you have a reductive view of the human person. Like, no, it's actually, maybe I'm becoming more human, right? I'm a better computer because I've optimized all these processes. But if you're not a computer, it looks very different. So I would say that in a way that's the foundational issue in some ways, is what is the human being? And are we just a computer or are we something more than a computer? And I would pose to you that we're more. And if we're more, then the post-human world really isn't all that human. Other questions? We can talk about anything, either from today or just AI questions generally. Yeah.
How would you recommend we sort of steer like the younger generation and their parents away from, giving them access to this technology too early, or maybe making them involve themselves entirely in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think touching grass, right? Living in meat space, sort of whatever your phrase is there. But I think, so I have little kids and maybe not get much tech at all. Like so that's like how I do it in my own family. It's like, I'm on tech as much as anybody, maybe even more. Like I'm on my computer all the time. But my kids, like they just don't get it. I think for exactly you're right, is I want them to get that analog human side of things, and then they can make their own choice about how much they're going to be in digital and online. I think the other thing that I would say, I think a big part of the battle here is intentionality and awareness, and being aware exactly what we're giving up when we allow AI or algorithms or social media to make decisions for us, right? So to be very aware that when I'm doom scrolling on YouTube and just like clicking randomly on videos, that I'm giving some of my agency, not only to an algorithm, but to a monetized algorithm, right? That somebody's making a profit off those clicks, that those have been personalized for me by somebody else. And again, I'm not saying that's like horrible, but I think just being aware that that's what you're doing, and then sort of thinking like, do I want to like consume all my content that way, or do I like want to actually sometimes ask other people like, what are you watching? Could that be interesting to me? So I think intentionality is a big part of the battle. Personally, I keep on going. I do not wear a Fitbit right now, but I keep going back and forth. I'm like, maybe it could be like kind of helpful. Like I'm tired a lot. Like maybe it could help me figure out like how I could. I know why I'm tired. I don't sleep at all. But maybe it could be motivating. If I was like, oh man, I only had like 5 hours of sleep. I really got to do better tonight. But I think like being aware that like, no, what I'm doing is trying to help me become a better human, and I'm not like giving all my control over to this device that I'm wearing. So yeah, I would say intentionality and awareness are a big part of it. Yeah.
Do you think humans are becoming less and less intelligent as we rely like more on AI? Like I know that there's studies that like people who play the piano and have like it stimulates the brain and increase like more gray matter. Like, do you think that now that we're using more AI, like we're gonna be less intelligent?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess part of it depends on what you mean exactly by intelligent. But again, think about, and this is it's a case I've used a couple of times, but I use it because I think it's obvious. Think about our geographical intelligence. This is one that all of us, including yours, truly uses, right? Like when I was growing up in rural Minnesota, I knew my area really well. I was like, I know how to get to Brent's house, and I know how to get to Kenny's house. And if I like missed a turn because I was singing along to Green Day, I could like circle around the block. Like I knew those roads really, really well. I don't know where I live that well anymore. I kind of do, but it's like if somebody was telling me, "Oh, like go over here, it's past that one road," I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna. Where are we going?" Right. So yeah, I mean, we've lost our geographical intelligence collectively, largely because we've given control over to Siri. So I think that's a good analogy for all these other areas of our life too, right? The more that you let ChatGPT write things for you. But here's what's crazy, right? And this is why, as an ethicist, it's both frustrating and maybe hopeful, is that I don't think you're doing something ethically wrong when you use Siri to get to Brent's house. And I don't think you're doing something ethically wrong if you use if you're doing it for a paper, probably. But if it's like to just like, I don't know, help you write some copy for an ad campaign that you're doing or something, like it's like, well, yeah, that's not like ethically atrocious or even wrong. But I think the more and more we do, the less intelligent we become, right? Because then I lose my capacity. I like don't know how to write that copy. But also, I would argue that the less human we become, because we have these things. Humans navigate geographically. We like are creative, and the more we let the AI do it, the less and less we're able to do it ourselves. Yeah.
Let's say, should we really like kind of care that we're losing this stuff? Because like,
Good.
you can go back even further. Like, I don't know how to make a wooden spear out of flint and rocks and stuff like that. But with that, like from the human experience, like you're saying, like almost navigating somewhere is like I'm not the best at navigating, like I can get around and stuff like that.
Good.
Like,
Good.
Is it like just a natural progression of stuff becoming obsolete, or are we really like using something having this?
Yeah, good. No, I think it's an excellent question. And I think it's actually a good observation because it makes the point that AI is something new in some ways, but it's also something that's similar to other technologies. Notoriously, Plato did not like pens. Or quills, or whatever they were using back in the old-timey Greek days. Why? Because his argument was that we're not going to remember things as well if we write them down. And he was absolutely true, right? Think about the great epic poets, right? If you read your Homer, like those were like oral traditions. People used to like know the Iliad and just like recite it. That's crazy, right? We can't do that anymore. Why? Well, in large part because Plato was right. We started writing them down. We're like, well, why don't you like memorize the Iliad? That's a lot of work. I can just write it down and I actually transmit the knowledge better. But we lost that ability. This is why the media theorist Marshall McLuhan talks about technology in this way. He says that whenever we, through technology, add a prosthetic, there's also an amputation involved. Right? So I put on my new fancy prosthetic arm, but in order to do that, I've got to, sorry, just a little gruesome, but like I've got to take off the biological arm and put on the prostheses. So his point, of course, is that with every technological advancement and every addition, there's also a loss. So I agree with you. I think that there are some similarities with other technologies. What I want people to see, though, and reflect on is exactly what it is that you're losing. Because I think in the case of AI, we're losing a whole lot.
One thing that comes up a lot in articles I've been reading and thinking I've been doing about AI is how it may or may not increase inequality, and like not only that technology is like personalized for you, but just the divide between people who are able to access it and have lives that are influenced by it and people who are not. And I think that also having an awareness of inequality and injustice is part of being human.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any concerns about this?
Yeah, so I think there's problems with both bias and inequality on several levels with AI. We know that there's a big problem when you're building an AI for technical reasons, that it's really hard to eliminate biases in the AI. As in, so here's an example. I'm pretty sure this is real. If not, it's hypothetical, but a good hypothetical is there was an AI being built by a healthcare system to help determine sort of what care people are given, right? And so the way they build this, right, is they give it a whole bunch of healthcare data to look at, to figure out, oh, like when this patient is treated this way, when this is what we give them, and here's what we tend to do when they have this diagnosis and things like that, right? What it ended up doing is paying attention not only to healthcare data, but also to zip code at which the people lived at, because it turns out that healthcare people received is correlated with socioeconomic status, which is correlated with zip code. So what it wound up doing is just sort of taking the shortcut and being like, oh, poor zip code, a little less healthcare for you, fancy zip code, a little more healthcare for you, which of course is horrifying and totally unintended by the people who are building this thing. But you've got this like clearly systematic bias that's cutting people up around socioeconomic status. And there's a whole bunch of other examples like this too. There's racist AIs and other kinds of bias, and it's really hard to avoid. So I think that's also, for me at least, that's one of the main sticking points of injustice that I get concerned about, is that the more we rely on them for our decision making, the more that it's not just an anonymous neutral technology that we're relying on for decision making, but it's something that's inevitably affected by biases, which is really problematic. And then there's also you were bringing up too, the problem of distribution, of who actually gets access to it, who's using it. And I would add to that, who's making it. So there's the sort of who gets to use it, and obviously there's going to be some disconnect here, like who has both the education and the access, and there's going to be a have and have-nots divide. There's also going to be the like have a tons and everyone else divide. It's like the top 0.001% or whatever. They're the ones who are like, no, we're the ones building these. And there's going to be that divide too. So there's all kinds of justice issues here too. And those are hugely concerning.
It's just the hyper-personalization and then Terminator. But in terms of war,
We're going to have hyper-personalized Terminator. Arnold shows up and says, I've got a specific way.
well, I guess I'm wondering after this recent thing with pagers blowing up,
Oh yeah.
like, well, what's the future of war?
Oh, yeah.
Hyper-personalize how we attack individual people, and especially if everybody's got their personalized device, is this going to be like a? And could you even then do it through AI and what we're watching? Could they do? And I'm not sure. It's like, is war going to change now with this hyper-personalization?
Absolutely. So I was at a talk just a couple months ago. I'm going to forget her name and forget her role. So she'll just have to be an anonymous someone. But she's in the federal government. I forget if she's military or like State Department. But she was high up in the federal government, or was high up. She might have retired. But her term for this is cognitive warfare. And it was hugely interesting because the idea is exactly what Father was just talking about, is how does this look in the hands of bad actors? So you think about what's the potential it has in the hands of good actors, and there could be some concerns even there, right? So like, do we want to do like hyper-targeted warfare that uses AI, like the pagers thing, right? Where it's, you can imagine like integrating AI where it's even more hyper-personalized and targeted. But she was talking about in what ways can what we've seen with disinformation and misinformation that's been the part of governing, so there's all the Russia misinformation, like that conversation. But what happens basically when you can use AI to start influencing public opinions in even more subtle ways, such that you try and undermine democracy based on what you're watching on Joe Flicks, right? So maybe Joe Flicks all of a sudden gets co-opted by some bad actor. Like, no, like actually I'm going to try and like on Joe, but all the other flicks, right? On Father Chris Flicks and on Matt Flicks, right? That all of these are sort of nudging us in ways that are trying to undermine democracy or some other goal of nefarious actor. And apparently the State Department is very concerned about this. So they call it's like cognitive warfare. It's like, no, we've got to be one step ahead of this because this is absolutely one development of AI that they're thinking about right now.
I just have a comment about that. Like beyond the cognitive warfare, it's getting into the physical warfare space too. And I think it was like 3 years ago we dropped like 500 pilotless drones somewhere in Syria, and they were able to just like recognize a body.
Yeah.
Just glue to that.
Yeah, no, the physical warfare part is really scary. I think where we stand right now is there's a moratorium on entirely autonomous weapons. So don't quote me on that. I don't know this literature as well, but I'm pretty sure right now there's a ban on entirely autonomous weapons, but there isn't on partially autonomous. So you can get it to where like literally all the human has to do is push the button, like the kill button. And that's like not fully autonomous, right? There was a human that had to push the button. So even with some of the legislation and sort of moratoriums that are in effect, and this is like the good actors, right? The ones who are actually going to abide by the rules. Even then, there's sort of this still an extra big question about, well, what about partially autonomous stuff? This is something I didn't talk about him much, but Pope Francis has been really ahead of the curve in this. He's been talking a lot about AI, and this is one of his concerns, that he just addressed the G7 a month or two ago. And he was mostly focused with fully autonomous weapons, which is mostly people are like, yeah, that seems like a bad idea. Again, just to be clear what that is, it's like where you just let the drones go and they, here's the picture of your targets, and go for it and like let me know when it's done. And then they go and do their business, and that was warfare. Like, there was no human involved. And most people think that's a good idea, but now the secondary debate that has to happen is, well, what about when it's just integrated? Because clearly we're going to start integrating AI into weaponry, and how much human involvement do we want to have in order for us to think that there's some kind of ethical viability there? I mean, that's assuming that any kind of warfare is up, but like sort of where are the lines going to be? So it's a huge question right now, and it's something we didn't even touch on here. I was much more focused on like personal use, but there's these questions about AI at the level of warfare in government that are huge and are being hotly debated and have to be resolved very quickly because like the tech is going very quickly. Yeah.
I'm like a lot more afraid of people, I guess, being in warfare and stuff like that, and like designing weapons and stuff. Because people are really, really, really good, like designing other ways and like figuring out other ways to kill other people and stuff. I feel like if AI was integrated into that, I don't know if it'd be better or worse, honestly, because like I said, like we've figured out really good ways to kill people and stuff.
Yeah.
Like that. So do you think like AI warfare would make that AI like physical warfare to be like more violent and be a bigger problem?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. And I think we're at time, aren't we?
Here we are.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think there's some analogy with the autonomous vehicle thing too. Is sort of how does effectiveness and safety in the case of self-driving cars, and how does sort of human failings and humans sort of being messy in warfare play into the other question. I think it's really interesting, and I think I see the argument that you're making is that no, maybe actually AI integration could help us be more targeted, and that would be a good thing rather than a bad thing. It's a really good observation.
Let's thank Joe.
For great questions and your attention.
Thank you for all your great